Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, about to be joined by Ken Wiebe from Sportsnet. Together, we are Kenny and Renny, and this is the Kenny and Renny post-game show. And what a post-game show we expect this to be. A ton to talk about, and clearly the leaving of Paul Maurice is going to take up a lot of real estate. I'm just going to talk quickly about the game before we bring Ken in here. And I want to say this, the reason why we're a touch late, I've just been sitting here talking to my computer for the last 3 minutes before Ken phoned me to say I forgot to hit the live button. You missed out on some gold, let me tell you, everybody. But I'll try and recreate it if I can. Game here where I think a lot of people, what they're hoping for when there's a coaching change is a little bit of that bump, some intensity, some action. And I'm not sure we saw that. If you're looking for the Bruce Boudreau bump, the likes we've seen in Vancouver, I think they've won 6 straight games under him. We did not see that here tonight. I didn't see anywhere near that level of energy. I've got some theories on that. We'll get into that. But one thing I wanted to point out before we really get going here, I was talking to Ken about this. Take a look at the standings, everybody. The Winnipeg Jets, they are as close in points to the Seattle Kraken as they are to the likes of the Nashville Predators and the St. Louis Blues. That's right. They're 8 points behind those teams, only 8 points up on the Seattle Kraken, only 1 point up on a team like Vancouver. That seemed impossible not too long ago. But you take a look at the standings, and it feels, when you look at those standings, that the Jets, who've hovered around 9th, 10th place for this entire time here, may feel like they're treading water. That's not the case. They are falling behind. Teams are leaving them in the rearview mirror right now. There's a sense of urgency, and we'll get to that because Brendan Dillon brought it up, but there needs to be a sense of urgency with this team. They need to get going, especially in the next 5 games where they play 5 straight against Central Division rivals. We'll get into all that, but the best guy for us to get into that with is my main man, Ken Wiebe, who's got the best opening music in the business. Time for me to hit that play button. Here we go. Here comes Kenny. Ken Wiebe, everyone knows how much you love to hit the buffet, and I think we hit the work buffet today. Let's go through what we did. I woke up this morning, I did the 32 Thoughts podcast, and that was before the news broke. After that, I did some...
Hey, hang on a second. We were on the phone, and then the news dropped.
Yes, exactly. We were breaking down what happened on the 32 Thoughts podcast, and then right after that, everything happened. Just a crazy day from that point on. I did the Hockey Central show before we headed into the games this evening. I did Fan 590 in Toronto. You tell us about your day, Ken. It's been a busy one.
Yeah, radio hit with Jeff Merrick on his show today, Instant Analysis for Sportsnet.ca. You and I did a TV digital hit off after the news broke. Then I had a CGOB hit with Jim Toth in the afternoon. Jumped on with Hustler on Winnipeg Sports Talk. Wrote my column, 1,200 words worth, and we did a post-game hit just now, and now we're going to be locked in for at least an hour more of discussion with our faithful folks in the chat room who are fired up, and I'm sure some of them will be dropping some "I told you so"s on us. So
I'm sure they will be. Hey, I will say this: there was a lot of. I'm just going to go in this direction quickly before we get out of it because we know we're going to be busy with this. But talked about the Kenny and Renny show on the 32 Thoughts podcast, which was a lot of fun to do. Talked about the Kenny and Renny show on Hockey Central. It was all over the place today, and I can just tell you, Ken, it's the situation where a couple people tweeted it right away. But when big news happens like this, in my mind, I just can't wait to get where we are right now on the Kenny and Renny show with the chat room firing on all cylinders, which we fully expect it's going to be here today. A ton to talk about. You want to say something before we get into it?
Yeah, just a quick thing. I know there were a bunch of people that reached out on social media asking if we could do an afternoon edition, and to be honest, we really couldn't today.
No.
I barely left it. The only time I left the arena today, for folks who are just curious, I left the rink for 5 minutes because I had to go, because of the rush to get to the rink. I parked on the street in front of the arena. After the press conferences were over, I had to move my car into the parking lot, went and quickly grabbed a snack at lunchtime, and then was basically sitting at my computer until game time, just trying to pound out the writing and get the oral part of the history down. And like you said, Sean, I mean, one of the more exciting parts of your job is the ability to chronicle history, and this was a defining moment in Winnipeg Jets 2.0 history with what we learned today. And now we'll see what the players can author in this new chapter under Dave Lowry.
I just want to say, again, we love doing the Kenny and Renny stuff. We hope we're serving you. I think that is interesting that someone brought that up, because that's what I wanted to do, Ken. When we originally started doing this, one of the things we wanted to do was to be able to tackle live stuff as it was happening.
And we have.
And we have. But one of the things that I was very proud to say, with our time at Sportsnet, Ken, we all know about this. We all know, as Canadian hockey fans outside of Toronto, I think everybody knows that Toronto stories get their fair share of coverage. But this was a day where Sportsnet came back to this market again and again and again in a ton of different mediums. So I'm proud I'm proud of the work that we did today. I'm proud of our employer for handling today the way today I think needed to be handled, should have been handled. So pat on the back for our employers in that situation. Let's get down to it, Ken. And we said this in the past. I don't think heading into this, people were wondering if that last game against the Buffalo Sabres was going to be Paul Maurice's last game. A lot of people were talking about it in our chat room. In the end, they're right. I didn't think it was happening, and I didn't think it was going to happen because I didn't think that the Jets management team was in a place where they were ready to go in that direction yet. And I still to this moment don't think that was the case. I think if Paul Maurice doesn't step aside, he's still coaching here this evening. We can debate that. The chat room, I'm sure there's going to be people debating that. But I got to say, when it happened this morning, I was extremely surprised. What was your take when it happened?
Yeah, stunned. I mean, I'd even go further than surprised. As I wrote in my column at sportsnet.ca, there are not very many times when the person behind the wheel decides to turn in the keys before the lease is up or before he's asked for the keys back. And I thought it was a really interesting take from Paul Maurice, who really was at ease with the decision, Sean. You know that this had to be incredibly difficult for him to do, but he seemed to have got himself to a good place, if that makes sense. I think this is a guy who is passionate about coaching. He loves this market. It's become his home for both him and his family. And I think he just didn't want to overstay his welcome, if you will, is how I would describe it. I think that he's a guy who's been searching for solutions, loves that part of the job, trying to find a way to ignite his team to be better. And it felt like he just got to the point where his message wasn't stale, but it also wasn't resonating the way that it once did. I think he's going to take some time to decompress and collect his thoughts. I think he'll do a thorough evaluation of his long time here, and I think we're going to see Paul Maurice behind a bench again. I think we could see him back in the media before that, but I don't think for 1 second Paul Maurice is done coaching. I think that he's burnt out right now, but I expect Paul Maurice to come back refreshed and take another run at a job with someone else where he gets to that opening point, that's what he discussed today, of coming here on an interim tag and ended up staying here almost 8 full years, and how important that was and what that meant to him. But this was not a coach bailing on his players. This was a coach stepping aside because he felt he couldn't get them to where they needed to go.
I think that what we saw from the players and talking about this, I mean, if anyone was thinking that the team, like the players would be, having a celebration when he walked out the door and that they'd quit on him, chance. I think that this was, the way that they handled themselves when asked about this. I think they're pretty choked about it. But and Ken, I think that Paul Maurice handled himself with a lot of class on the way out the door, with his comments, the way he talked about the city, the way he talked about his relationships with the players, with the management, with the ownership of this team, with the media. I thought he handled it with as much class. Well, he handled it with the class you would have expected Paul Maurice to handle it with. But I still think this is an extremely strange situation here, and extremely strange that he decided to take himself out of the equation here. And in the end, Ken, what has been the criticism of the people in this chat room, on social media for years about Paul Maurice, is that they didn't think he was the guy to get it done with this team. They didn't think he could get it done with this team. And the interesting part about all this for me is, in the end, Paul Maurice agreed with those people. I mean, we take a look at what he did here today. He figured that he got to the point that he could take this team as far as he could take them, and that's been what a lot of the move on from Maurice crowd have been saying. And he admitted that, or he sided with those people. Now, I agree with you. I don't think that this is the last of Paul Maurice, and I do think that he's highly respected around the league, and I think he will pop up somewhere else again. But I think this is really, really strange for him to walk away from the team like this at this stage. I can't think of an instance where this has happened like this before. One of the things that I had thought was really strange was, if he walks away from this, does it mean that there's no compensation for him? Sounds like there was some kind of deal struck. Kevin Cheveldayoff didn't want to get into details, but I asked him about it, and he said he will be taken care of going forward. So it sounds like Paul Maurice isn't walking away from the money that was owed in his contract. But this is an interesting situation, and I'll say it like this. I asked him about this team because one of the things I think Paul Maurice that has saved his job time and time and time again over 8 years. You don't last 8 years without having either some close calls or avoiding some pitfalls along the way that could lead to you losing your job. The one thing Paul Maurice seemed to be able to do time and time and time again, go back to 2019 when the Jets started that season looking like they were one of the best teams in the league. Then the new year hit and they absolutely fell apart. But what did they do? They take the eventual Stanley Cup winners to 6 games, come close to going up 3-2 in that series. And it's enough for Jets management to look and say, yeah, things didn't go that well in the second half of the year. We don't like that, but we came that close to knocking off the eventual winners. We got something going on here. Then the Byfuglien thing falls apart for the next 2 years. The Jets don't believe they have the roster to do it. Then last season, the Jets make a really decent push, fall apart at the end of the season. What happens? He pulls them out of the tailspin and leads them to a sweep of the Edmonton Oilers, which I think, had they lost to the Edmonton Oilers in the first round, you may have seen the last of Paul Maurice that last year. And then you come into this season, they start out with the best start they've ever had in Jets 2.0 history, and this starts happening. The one thing about Paul Maurice is whenever those tough times came, he was able to get the team to turn things around, pull out of that tailspin, and would say how he was going to do it. Like, that was the thing about it last year, Ken. When they lost those 7 straight games, he said how this team was going to work its way out of it and what it was going to look like coming out of it, and that's exactly what they looked like. If you can tell your players, this is what you're doing wrong, this is how we're going to fix it, and this is what it's going to look like, and you do that, you gain an immense amount of trust, not only from your players, but from your management, that you know how to fix the problem. But he did say this year, as things have kind of fallen off the tracks over the last month, maybe a little bit more than a month, it was like starting up. He was always able to start up the engine, right? But the engine, he'd start it up and it would run less and less and less before it knocked out. Start it up again, it would run less and less and less. I think Paul Maurice took a look at this team, the reaction he was getting from it, and knew he could get them back up on their feet, but that they really didn't want to be up on their feet for that long once he did get them up. And I think that he saw the end was near, and I honestly think, Ken, he saw the end was near with him and the players before management saw it, before ownership saw it. For him to step away, I mean, there's a little bit, there's admiration in him doing that, but there has to be a look at this and think Paul Maurice started this year to complete a job. He didn't get that job done and walked away from that job, and there's something to be said about that.
Yeah, I mean, I know where you're coming from, Sean, and for sure it requires further examination down the road for sure, but I mean, Mark Scheifele, I think, said it best. This was a selfless act by a coach. It wasn't a coach bailing, looking for the life preserver and jumping overboard. For me, I think that we're using car analogies. I mean, this week the Jets cleaned out the carburetor with their practice when they got their conditioning skate in. To me, this is like the rechargeable battery that you've put onto the charger so many times, and suddenly the battery, even though it's been on the charger, isn't getting the same voltage and the same wattage. And I think that's the other thing. I don't think that the Jets tuned out Paul Maurice, but I'm not sure they were listening as intently as they had in the past. I think they needed a fresh voice. And when you have to think about it this way, Sean, to get to the point where you volunteer, that's what you think the solution is, that they need a fresh voice. You can only do that when you've been around coaching for nearly 3 decades at the National Hockey League level. And again, I think it would have been a tough decision for him to make, but he seemed very much at ease with it. He did not look like a guy who had spent a lot of time looking over his shoulder at a possible successor. But at the same time, I think here's a guy who became incredibly frustrated by the results not being there for his group that he's invested so much time and energy. And I think we often talk about the emotional scar tissue that the team has built up with those disappointments, starting at the Western Conference Final, going to the St. Louis Blues exit, that Game 5 that you mentioned, that, the play we talk about all the time, Kevin Hayes, putting the puck towards the goal line. He gets tackled by Colton Parayko, somehow knocks the puck past Jordan Binnington and out of the net. And instead of taking a commanding 3-0 lead, it's 2-0. The Blues battle back. And then in the waning seconds, Tyler Bozak finds Jaden Schwartz after Alex Steen barrels over Mark Scheifele in the corner. And the series turned around on its head, and that was it for the Jets. And there too, Sean, one thing I want to remind folks, yes, things went poorly and south in the second half of that year for the Jets, but they started going south after Dustin Byfuglien suffered his first of 2 ankle injuries in that game against the Minnesota Wild. I think it was the first game after the Christmas break. And then they lost Josh Morrissey for the final 20 games of the year. So losing 2 of your top defensemen, I'm not surprised that things kind of went sideways on the Jets. But the big thing was they just couldn't hang on to first place. They were in first place for so long, and they just couldn't hang on to that. A couple big losses down the stretch where they, wilted, quite frankly. And then they played their best hockey in the playoffs, but they couldn't find a way out of that first round. And after that, hey, the facts are the facts. The Jets won 1 playoff series after making the conference final. And the thing that stands out to me and will forever, Sean, remember Paul Maurice at the exit meetings. Everyone was talking about how the window of contention was just opening for the Winnipeg Jets. Yeah. They made the conference final. Oh, hey, guess what? These guys are a year older. Look at all the experience these young snipers got. If you got to the conference final this year, that must mean they're going to go to the Stanley Cup final next year. Paul Maurice was quick to say, hey, it's no automatic that you just get back to where you have been. And I think the Jets they forgot how hard it was to get to the conference final. And that showed for a couple of years after that. And they kind of tried to rebuild on the fly. And yes, they made a qualifying round. And of course, they played great against the Edmonton Oilers. But that series turned on its head. If Josh Archibald doesn't take that penalty in Game 3, we're certainly not talking about a sweep. And that series could have been 2-2 in the snap of a finger, the way the Jets played back-to-back in those games in Winnipeg, and would have been having to go back to Edmonton for Game 5. But, that's not to take anything away from the Jets who swept that series. But, the facts of the matter are simple. The Jets did not get to where they wanted to go. Paul Maurice bears some of that responsibility, but he doesn't bear all of it. The players have to be accountable here, and that was one of the major themes coming out of Kevin Cheveldayoff's presser, Sean. To me, that was as forthcoming as we've heard Kevin Cheveldayoff when it came to challenging his players, both privately to them and publicly to the media afterward.
So, Ken, Cash Valley had said this earlier on. I can't go back and find it, but There's going to be a sense out there. There's going to be a lot of people that believe that this was an effort by the Winnipeg Jets to not embarrass Paul Maurice out the door and give him the option to step away or be fired. A lot of people are going to feel that. Akash Valley says he doesn't believe for a second that it was Maurice's choice to leave when he did. What's your take on that? Why is it your take?
It is my take. It's very simple. If the Jets were planning on firing Paul Maurice, they just had 2 days off between games. If they were planning on firing him, they would have fired him after the Buffalo game.
Exactly. If you are Kevin,
this is simple.
You are going to fire him. The timing of firing him this morning, right before, as the team arrives and tell him, it's terrible timing. If that was the case, it is an extremely poor job done by Kevin Cheveldayoff. The timing of this firing this morning, I think, put this game tonight out of reach for the Winnipeg Jets players who come in thinking we're getting ready to prepare for our morning skate against the top team in the league, and now all of a sudden we've got this emotional baggage that we need to deal with. If that's the case, that Kevin
it's not the case.
Planned, yeah, it is not the case. And I'll tell you this as well. The one thing that Kevin Cheveldayoff did say was that when Paul Maurice came to him, basically Mike McIntyre was trying to get to the root of if Kevin
Sure.
Paul Maurice did not step away, was he going to get fired? Now Kevin Cheveldayoff didn't answer that question, and I think the answer to that question is the management group was getting to a stage where they were starting to ponder the question, right?
Sure.
But if you've got your head coach come to you and say, you know what, my heart's not in it anymore, I think I'm going to step away. You're not saying, no, please don't go out the door. If you started asking that question, that's the confirmation you need. If you started to wonder if this team needs a new coach and your coach comes to you and tells you he thinks you need a new coach, then there's no arguing the point. So I think that's where we were with Kevin Cheveldayoff. If the Jets kept down this road, I'm thinking, I put it this way, they've got a stretch of 6 games before the end of the year here, 5 of them against Central Division teams. The only one of those games that looks like it's like, hey, you should win this game, and not even that is, never is in the NHL, but is against Chicago. Other than that, you've got 5 Central Division teams and the Calgary Flames. I mean, this could have been, if Paul Maurice had kept on, and may still be with Dave Lowry at the helm, a bit of a slaughter going down the stretch here towards the new year. If if Paul Maurice would have stuck around and gone through the ringer here to the end of the year, I think we would have started the new year
Coach's
with
watch.
Coach if it was left up to Kevin Cheveldayoff. But at this stage, I still think that there was rope for Paul Maurice. I don't think that this was them coming to him and saying, we need you to move along, but we don't want to fire you. And here's the other reason why. A coach getting fired, it is not a black mark on the coach. No one is trying to avoid firing the coach. Think of the best coaches in history, everyone out there, and my guess is they've been fired once, twice, multiple times, right? Guys get fired. The best coaches in the world get fired. Barry Trotz got fired. How many times did we see Peter Laviolette, a Stanley Cup winning coach here, fired throughout his career? Scotty Bowman, how many times did he get fired? Good, phenomenal coaches, the best coaches ever get fired. No one looks at it and says, man, that guy got fired. It's the end for him. So there's no reason to go to these lengths to try and avoid firing a coach. Paul Maurice most definitely had a handle in this. The timing, he may have gone out the door. He may have walked out the door before he was pushed out the door, but there is no brokering behind the scenes, in my mind, a deal to make him get him out the door without people, like in an effort to not embarrass him.
No, exactly, and that's what I say. I mean, we know there's a lot of theories out there, but this is a simple one. Paul Maurice got to the point where it was time for him. He knew it was time, and he decided it was time, and he went out on his own terms. And the reason why, Dave Lowry explained it perfectly. Before Kevin Cheveldayoff called him on Thursday night with the news and to see if he was interested in being the interim coach, he had no idea. And I can tell you right now, almost no one has spent more time with Paul Maurice this season than Dave Lowry. So if Dave Lowry didn't know and Kevin Cheveldayoff didn't know, the only person that knew was Paul Maurice. And I'm guessing the other interesting part too, Sean, he sort of seemed to hint that this almost happened a few other times already this year. Is that not what you took from what his statements were?
Sorry, say that again. Ask me that question again.
Paul kind of seemed as though this could have happened a little bit earlier, but he kind of waited on the resignation part.
I know,
or that was my interpretation.
You're trying to set me up for a point here. The point is, I think our belief behind the scenes, Jamie Compon arrived back with the Jets. This was his first game with the Jets on the bench this season. Sorry, not the first game with him on the bench because he was down in California. So when they were down in California, he joined them on the bench, but he's now back with the team on the bench with them. While he was gone, his duties, in-game duties on the bench, fell to Dave Lowry. I think, and Paul Maurice had mentioned about having this date circled on the calendar because that's the date they knew that Jamie Compon was coming back. My guess is Paul Maurice may have been out the door earlier than this, likely would have been out the door earlier than this, left and walked out the door earlier if Jamie Compon had come back earlier. What he didn't want to do, knowing that the chances were Dave Lowry was going to take his place on the bench, he didn't want to put Dave Lowry in a position to fail by leaving him, putting him in charge as a head coach and having to do the head coaching duties and either find someone to take care of Jamie Compon's duties that he was covering for, or have to do all those jobs all in one shot here. So I think that there's multiple times that Paul Maurice, and again, here's the other thing, Ken, that we should get into, because and this to me is the struggle that we're going to have, or that Dave Lowry is going to have. He came in and what did he say after this game? Teams got to play hard, they got to play fast, they got to get to the front of the net. This is the mantra, this is the hockey that Paul Maurice has been trying to get the Winnipeg Jets to play for 2 years now. So the message that Dave Lowry comes out and says after his Game 1 loss is the same message that we've been hearing from Paul Maurice for a long time now. I think the understanding, or I think Paul Maurice's philosophy, is that this team was never going to get over the hump if he couldn't get them engaged, crashing the net and trying to score those ugly goals, like the goal that won the game winner for the Washington Capitals tonight, but by a skilled line. I mean, TJ Oshie's line goes in and just basically pushes the puck over the line. Paul Maurice, I don't believe, thinks that the Winnipeg Jets can be a winning team until they play that kind of hockey. He couldn't get them to play that kind of hockey. Dave Lowry now is going to try and get them to play that kind of hockey. The interesting part, and this is for a big conversation to come after this, his response to that, Ken, was that they've got like a skilled team that plays a certain kind of game. It makes me wonder if the construction of the Winnipeg Jets is one that they can play that game, because it sure does. It sure looks on a lot of nights like Mark Scheifele isn't interested in playing in that game. We don't know how much Kyle Connor with his size or Nick Ehlers with their size can play that kind of game. What Dave Lowry has said is they're going to have to find players on this roster willing to play that kind of game in order for them to pull this off. Paul Maurice was never able to consistently get the Jets to play that style of hockey. And to me, once he realized that wasn't going to happen, that was the time he said, it's time for me to go.
I would disagree just on the fact that the year that they went to the Western Conference Final, they went to the hard areas quite regularly. And
Totally different team. Totally different team.
But
I mean, Joel Armia is on that team on the fourth line. You've got depth who can pull that off. We saw what Joel Armia did in for the Montreal Canadiens. I mean, he's built to play that kind of game. Lowry, along with, in those times like Mason Appleton since, but Brandon Tanev and Andrew Kopp, they're built to play that kind of game. Blake Wheeler at that time may have been the best player in the league at playing that kind of game. The perimeter game is the thing that the Jets love to play, and they play it better than anyone else in the league, and they play it prettier than anyone else in the league. We've talked about this at length, but playing that game does not get you anywhere in the playoffs. And the convincing of this team to try and go to the dirty areas has fallen on deaf ears for a long time for Paul Maurice. To me, that's the thing that he could never convince this team to do, and the reason he thought it was time for a new voice to try and teach that lesson.
Well, he couldn't have never done it because he did it the year they went to the conference final. But since then, if you're saying that, I know what you're saying. They need to do a better job at that for sure. I want to address this first from Rob. I take the opposite view on this. Dave Lowry was not on the staff for a long time. This is his second season on the coaching staff. So for me, this is not just a a kind of recycling of ideas from someone who has been attached at the hip. This is not Dallas Aikens and Paul Maurice, who coached together for a long time, both with the Marlies and with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Just with the with both those teams. So I think that Dave Lowry will bring some fresh ideas. I think that he's a guy who has wanted to be a head coach for a long time. And another thing, these are not the circumstances he was looking for, but this is a big opportunity, much like with Dom Ducharme coming in. When you study for the test, you're not nervous about the exam. That's not to say the exam is going to be 100%, but I don't expect Dave Lowry to be overwhelmed by the situation. But this is his first chance to run his own bench, and you're right, convincing some of those skilled players to play a little bit more like a Pierre-Luc Dubois. That's going to be one of the challenges. To me, I thought that Ehlers was in the hard areas today. Sean, I thought he was buzzing around the net. He went to the slot on several occasions. I thought that Kyle Connor was around the net quite a lot as well. And especially Ehlers. Ehlers was the best player on the ice for the Jets. I mean, 7 shots on goal, 11 attempts. But
and Josh Morris.
Morrissey was great as well. Yeah, I agree with you for sure. But like you said, I mean, this is another game this was a game the Jets had to have. Given the players that were out of the Capitals lineup, they needed to produce. I mean, no offense to Michael Scarbosa, who was a very good player for the Manitoba Moose, but Michael Scarbosa is a great player for the Hershey Bears, and he had a goal and an assist tonight. Brett Leeson, he's a high draft pick, but just got a kind of guy. This is what these teams do, Sean. This is what the Pittsburgh Penguins do. This is what the Washington Capitals do. They play to the structure of their system. They have some high-end talent, but they play it the certain way every single night, and that's what makes them successful. And that's not to say you can just spin guys in on the spin cycle from the minors, what they did tonight. So that's what good teams do. They fight through it, they find a way, and that's the one thing the Jets are going to have to do. You talked about urgency. Brendan Dillon touched on that urgency after the game. I mean, the Jets aren't happy with where they're at. We've heard this from players a lot. Andrew Kopp was very forthcoming in how he discussed this. The Jets don't see themselves as a bubble team, but right now, that's all that they are. They're not a Stanley Cup contender until they can push past the group of the bubble teams and start battling with those other teams, as you mentioned, the Minnesota Wild, the Colorado Avalanche, who have put a slow start behind them, and teams like the Blues. You talked about it. 5 consecutive games against the Central Division. This is not a lost season yet for the Winnipeg Jets, but they need to get moving. And if they don't get moving, then when they get close to the midway point, then they could be in a very precarious position if they don't pick it up.
I just want to address Brent Palachuk here, saying actually Kyle Connor scores a lot of goals close to the goal. I agree with that statement. My counter would be Kyle Connor scores a lot his goals close inside when he's kind of still in his wide open space, right? He gets in close and he shoots and he scores. It's not a matter the suggestion is that when games get really tough at a certain time of year, those places that he scores from disappear, right? There's people in those spots. What I'm talking about is the kind of goal that the Washington Capitals scored tonight, where it's just push the puck to the net and jam and jam and jam until you get that puck in. Tell me when the last time you saw Kyle Connor scoring those kind of goals, fighting off a guy, jamming it to the front of the net.
He's had one this year.
Style of goals. He went to the net and we celebrated it, Ken. It was a celebration. So that should tell you something. Everyone raved about the new edge to Kyle Connor's game because he went to the net with a guy on him and jammed a rebound in that one time. The fact that we talk about it and we still talk about it to this day kind of shows you how much of a unicorn play it is for a player like that. And you know what? I kind of wanted to get into it, that there's just so much to talk about Paul Maurice, but I was looking at that line tonight. So many people were excited that Dubois and Connor and Svechnikov back together. I thought they got better as the game went on, but the magic that they'd had earlier on in the season didn't really seem to be there. I wonder how much of that has to do with the fact that we talked about the different style of play that we were seeing Kyle Connor play when he was beside Pierre-Luc Dubois, and then he got back on a line with Wheeler and Scheifele, and they play that seam game, right? That moving around the shell game, and they don't go to the front of the net, and they make that pass across the ice, and it's a one-time one-timer in the back of the net. I wonder how many games it's going to take to kind of get back on the same page with a player like Pierre-Luc Dubois, who plays an entirely different game. I think a lot of people are of the feeling, I'm of the feeling, that the kind of game he was playing alongside Pierre-Luc Dubois has more potential, because he goes to the net like you were talking about, but it has more potential, and it's the best version of him that I feel I've ever seen before when he was playing that. But it's easy to fall into the style of play that he'd been playing with Scheifele and Wheeler. I know people love it, and it looks great when they score, and people were talking about it was, that line was back to being one of the best lines in the league when they played that game against the Vancouver Canucks. One, I don't care if they won a bunch of games, it was the Vancouver Canucks. Two, they lost that game. And three, I think that those kind of goals are the goals that disappear at the time of season where you really need to be scoring them, which goes back to the point of what Dave Lowry said tonight and what Paul Maurice has been saying. The Jets have to learn to score in different ways, and so getting Kyle Connor back to scoring the way he was with Pierre-Luc Dubois, I think, is important for this team.
Quick one right here, just on this point here from Kenny's water bottle. It's true. I mean, a lot of coaches on their way out, they don't owe the media anything. But the fact that Paul Maurice went out of his way to hold a press conference to give a farewell to the city of Winnipeg after he met with his players, that again goes back to the kind of the dignity and the class that he showed in terms of the way he handles things. So,
yeah, we are having dueling buffet. So Ken,
I got another one here. Let's attack this thing right here. You go first, and then I'll give my views.
Okay. I think this is a real tough task for Dave Lowry. I think if we take a look at what he's done in his career, he's for the most part, he's a junior hockey coach. His biggest moment came coaching Canada at the World Juniors. I think it's hard for anyone to look at his team in that tournament as anything more than one of the biggest failures Canada has ever had at that tournament. His time, on NHL benches is behind John Stevens in LA, which is like a time of failure for that team. Willie Desjardins, who comes in the second year that Dave Lowry is there and John Stevens is there, and that doesn't work out as well. He comes here, he's behind this team. You had said it before, this team needs a fresh voice. It needs things to change. I don't know how much of a fresh voice this is. I don't know how much different the message I'm hearing, like that we need to be faster, is basically the tenet that Dave Lowry is coming out with. It's exactly what we heard from Paul Maurice. I don't know how much different the plan is from Dave Lowry for this team than Paul Maurice's plan was. Just the idea that they think that maybe he's going to be able to execute the plan with the team or get the team to buy into it. I think that's a tough one. And the reason I think it's a tough one, and I wanted to get into, I'm going to kind of to handle this, because the next question I was going to have for you were what was Paul Maurice's failings in your mind in his time here? For me, Paul Maurice's failings were, I think at the root of it, Paul Maurice did not, in a number of cases, reward good play. And he rewarded players, or he didn't, and I don't want to say punish, because, as a teacher, you're not supposed to punish. But players, kind of approach the game at times with impunity. They did not feel that they needed to put in their best effort because there didn't seem like there was going to be any consequences for that, right? So if we think about it last year, when Mark Scheifele was benched for the first time by Paul Maurice towards the end of the season, how many people out there thought that should have happened a number of times before that Paul Maurice finally went that? I know that wasn't his style. Some coaches don't execute that style, but Paul Maurice really didn't go down that road. How many times were Blake Wheeler, Mark Scheifele, some of the top guys on this team not playing at their best, and there was no danger of them moving down the lineup because of that? And how many times did players on this team jump up into spots, get given an opportunity, hit it out of the park with that opportunity, and not stay in that spot, just get moved out of that spot because there was a hierarchy under Paul Maurice that existed, and there was no breaking that hierarchy. And I can tell you this, Ken, talking with players who left this team, that is what I heard from a number of players who aren't with the Winnipeg Jets anymore, that there was not rewards for for good behavior, for good play, for doing what you were asked to do. And other players, it didn't matter how they played, good or bad, that opportunity was going to continue to exist. I thought that was his best fail. I think that's what Dave Lowry is going to have to crack here. You're going to have a situation where Pierre-Luc Dubois shows consistently that he's this team's number one center, that he gets played like he's this team's number one center. That if Nick Ehlers starts taking over games the way that he did tonight, the way we've seen him do, the way that he did last season to the degree that Elliot Friedman was talking about him as being a Hart Trophy candidate at the end of this season, that he needs to be given the ice time and the opportunity that match that output. And as a rookie coach, I think it is a lot to ask of Dave Lowry to do that, because at some point, if that's the case, and if guys like Nick Ehlers start stealing the spotlight, and guys like Pierre-Luc Dubois start stealing the spotlight, or Andrew Kopp, who earlier on this year stole the spotlight, that is going to come at the cost of ice time of players potentially like Blake Wheeler, like Mark Scheifele, and you as a rookie head coach are going to have to do what I don't think Paul Maurice ever did, is go to those players and say, sorry, your output is not at a stage where you are deserving of this opportunity. And if you're saying that to your longtime captain, your assistant captain, how are they going to respond? This, to me, is the big question going forward. Can Dave Lowry do that if the situation demands that? And how are those players going to respond? And him being a rookie head coach in the NHL, I think that's a big ask. I think that's an ask that you need to have from a really big established coach who can walk in and say, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, I've proven this time and time again. I know this works, and you're just going to have to buy in. But to me, that is the task ahead of Dave Lowry. And I think it's a big task because I don't think Paul Maurice ever got to that.
Well, I mean, for me, I don't think that Dave Lowry is going to shy away from that, Sean. Let's look at the evidence from our one-game sample size. The last game, what were we talking about last game? Mark Scheifele had 6 more minutes than Pierre-Luc Dubois.
Yep.
Let's go to the sheet. Mark Scheifele tonight, 21:04. Pierre-Luc Dubois, 18:59.
Are you making my point for me right now?
Well, he just went from 6-minute disparity to 2 minutes. So he already took a step in game one towards doing that.
I will say this. I do think that Mark Scheifele's and Ehlers' line was the better of the two lines tonight. So I do think that the line that was going best was given the best opportunity. But it seemed weird that you were pointing out that he had less ice time. Sorry. Anyways,
but it's 4 minutes difference in the disparities. So he already cut into that in his first night behind the bench. So that to me would be he's immediately identified one of the issues that you just told him he needs to identify.
Sure. Yeah.
And of course, I mean, and that's the other part. How are the players going to respond? I mean, we saw Mark Scheifele this morning. Yeah, there you go. That's not quite a wake up, but it was close. And this is honestly a genuine wake up moment for the players. There's a new sheriff in town, and the previous hierarchy is out the window. So that's important. So for me, I don't think Dave Lowry is going to shy away from that at all. I mean, do you have to cater to some of your veteran players? Of course, but the window is wide open.
I don't know that you do, Ken. And I can tell you this.
Which is what I was saying. I mean, I don't think he's good. The hierarchy it's going to be reestablished. You're going to have to earn your ice time under Dave Lowry. And I think that's good for the Winnipeg Jets.
Okay, and I agree. And I think that he's going to head out and do that. What I'm saying is I don't think it's as simple as you just do that and the job is done. You are talking
that's not what I said.
Scenario. I know that's not what you said, but this is my counter to what you're saying. You said it's a game one. It's a game one sample size, right? So and like if we're talking where we get to a point in the season where, like, let's say, let's go back to an example that we had before. Let's say Dave Lowry is coaching this team when Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler are out with COVID, and those two lines are going the way they were. Is Dave Lowry the kind of guy who's going to keep those guys there and say, because we're winning and these guys have earned the opportunity, that's where they're going to stay? I've got faith in Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler that they're going to figure this out, and they're going to be third line minutes until that happens, right? Does he make that decision? Maybe he does. I think probably he does. I think he knows he has to go in that direction. My question is, how do the players who have not had that tough love respond to that? Because the players and their response is coming from players wearing A's, players wearing C's. Like so how that response comes across from those players is going to be big, and that's my question. How does if Blake Wheeler is told he needs to take a step back in order for this team to succeed, and he's told that by a rookie NHL head coach, how does he respond to that? Now, if he responds to it, fine, and Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler are able to say, we will play whatever role we have to on this team and follow through on that. If that's what it comes to, I'm not saying that's what needs to happen, but if that's what it comes to, then everything's fine, right? The question is that how it's going to happen? We don't know the answer to that question because we've never really seen that happen before, Ken. Last season, as good as Nick Ehlers was towards, in that season, and people were begging for him to get more opportunity, and the lines were getting blended, and we said early in the season, Ken, that in the end, we expected it was going to land on Mark Scheifele, Kyle Connor, and Blake Wheeler. Those guys got all the opportunity in that Montreal series to try and get them into it. I mean, they went heavy with that line. No one really produced.
Scheifele only played one game in that series.
Yeah, but Blake Wheeler and Kyle Connor went
for sure.
They were force-fed over and over again in that series. So this is just what I'm saying. If Dave Lowry goes in that direction, he's going in uncharted territory for this team. We don't know what the ramifications of that are. We don't know how the players who have been given opportunity at every turn, we don't know how they respond if some of those opportunities are taken away.
No, that's totally fair. Someone who was asking about Dave Lowry not being successful in junior hockey, he had a 59-win season, a 50-win season, and went to the finals once with the Calgary Hitmen. So he's had success there. Did it go well at the World Junior? No. He's also been on some really good NHL teams and played 1,084 games. So to me, I don't think that Dave Lowry has any trouble getting the respect of his players, nor do I think he'll have trouble relating to his players. This is a guy who is coaching a team that has some young and impressionable players on it. And I think that he'll be able to connect with them. Does he have to, how will the Jets respond when Mark Scheifele plays 2 minutes fewer than Pierre-Luc Dubois? Well, that's when we're really going to find out which way these guys are going to go. Give me a break, Clayton. Yeah, you can hand in your resume. That's good stuff. That's a full-on wake-up right there. If you played 1,084 games in the NHL and have Dave's coaching resume in the Western Hockey League and the NHL, then yes, you should apply for the job. Please do.
Let's. Anything else you want to say, or can we move on to the game here? We only have like 13 minutes left to go. You want to move on to the game?
I just mean too. I just think that it's very interesting times. I mean, of course, there are going to be questions asked. I mean, this is a new situation. But I think that Dave Lowry has been working towards this moment for quite a long time, and I don't think he's going to do anything but give everything that he can in terms of effort. I think he's a very smart guy. He's an engaging guy. He has a balance of old school intensity, but also new school ability to connect with his players. So there's some similar qualities to what Pascal Vincent has, and Pascal's a guy that we thought was going to be the successor to Paul Maurice whenever that day came. Pascal Vincent left the organization to go to a very good opportunity. What the coaching search looks like in the offseason, that will be fascinating. Does Dave Lowry do enough in his time in the 54 games to keep the job? We'll see. If he doesn't, there's a big, this will be an appealing job for a lot of people if it is still vacant at the end of this season. And one other thing that I've said, I've seen people in the chat saying the Jets should rebuild and start trading people. Their window's open. The Jets are not rebuilding. They're going for it. They have a Vezina caliber goalie for 3 seasons, including this one. They're not going to change gears and say, let's reload and give it a shot in 3 years' time. Nor should they. Here's
the deal, Ken. If they're going for it, then is there not a massive risk in handing the keys to a sport utility vehicle that you think could climb to the top of the mountain? Is there not risk in handing the keys over to someone who hasn't done this before?
Who's a better choice? And who are you and how much are you willing to pay them?
Okay.
I think Dave Lowry is a solid choice. It's up to him to get the job done, and it's up to the players to respond. I know some people suggesting John Tortorella. No, that's obviously not going to happen with the history with Pierre-Luc
Can't do
Dubois.
Tortorella with Pierre-Luc Dubois.
And
Pierre-Luc
you know,
Dubois
are you
is
going to
your
get Claude
future.
Julien? You don't even know if Claude Julien could finish the year with his health. I mean,
well, I mean, Claude Julien apparently was the first choice of the Vancouver Canucks. He wanted a 3-year deal. So, I mean, here's what I think. I think the Winnipeg. Okay, I think that this. I think you're wrong in the way that you're saying that they're going for it and they're going all in. I think they are, and I think they're doing it on the roster. But I
meant on the roster, yeah.
Right. But I don't think they're doing it with this decision. Now, I will say this. I thought when Dave Lowry was added to the staff, I thought at the time that they did that, the Winnipeg Jets were creating a situation where they had a trapdoor situation where if the coach had to go, they just dropped the trapdoor, the coach would go out and Dave Lowry would come up. I think that getting Dave Lowry was giving themselves the option to do exactly what they're doing here right now, bide themselves some time with a coach who's already on your bench. You don't have to your point, go out and pay to get a new coach. I also think that the Winnipeg Jets take a look out there and they're taking a look at what is out there, and they're not necessarily liking what they're seeing out there. So let's go quickly through the options. A guy like John Tortorella, not going to work because you need to lock down Pierre-Luc Dubois, and he just escaped that guy. He's not going to stick around long-term in Winnipeg if you've got Pierre-Luc Dubois coming back. Claude Julien, I mean, he's a potential opportunity out there, but to your point, like he had health issues when he was in Montreal and really was never able to get Montreal off the ground. So he doesn't exactly scream to you as a guy who like needs to come here right now at this moment. Mike Babcock comes with his own set of baggage. We know the hockey culture stuff as we're trying to have hockey culture change. He's very representative of the old hockey culture. The same thing with a guy like Coach Q, John Quenville, who, I mean, we know probably is not getting hired by any team, but there is no way he's getting hired by Kevin Cheveldayoff, who those two guys were in the room together when that situation happened with the Chicago Blackhawks. The optics of that would be absolutely terrible. So strike that name off the list with like rip it out or chisel it off the board because that's not happening. So I do think
Travis Green is a guy who could be under consideration down the road, but Travis Green is exactly where Paul Maurice is in terms of the, you know, not necessarily burnout, but having lived in a market where, you know, the death watch was coming for months. So I think Travis is going to step back and reinvigorate himself, and he'll probably be looking for a job next season if he doesn't have one before that time.
I mean, Montgomery is an interesting one because he seems to have gotten himself together. But, I mean, he left in questionable circumstances from the Dallas Stars. And we saw with the Dallas Stars, they got an ultimate bump, went to the Stanley Cup final after losing that coach. I always wonder what happens to a coach in that situation. So, I mean, you take a look around. I don't know that there's a lot there. And I think you touched on the name. I don't know if you said it like this, but I honestly think the way that the Winnipeg Jets feel about their organization and how they grow things, homegrown talent, I honestly think that had Paul Maurice decided in the summer when he was dwelling about this that he wasn't coming back, that I would not be surprised to see Pascal Vincent as the head coach behind this bench. I think that may be a place where they want to go. And so being quick to add Dave Lowry, the interim title until the end of the season, is a way of, you know, potentially either saying, here's your chance to prove to us that you deserve this job full time. That always works, but it's also a scenario where if it doesn't work out, it buys you time to get to the guy that you lost, that you wanted, that you never wanted to lose,
right?
And a guy that they can't take at this moment because there's no way the Columbus Blue Jackets are giving up a guy who's in charge of as much as he's in charge of there in the middle of the season. So I mean, I could see that being the situation. But I will say this, Ken, there is no way it is not a massive risk to take a rookie head coach and hand him the keys. Like, put it this way, Ken, and you talked about it in his first year as a head coach with the Calgary Hitmen. He goes to the WHL final, and he has some good seasons with Victoria. But let's say this, especially after what happened to him at the World Juniors, Dave Lowry's resume is not one that screams there's a position waiting for this guy in the NHL. Now, it's one that he's caught the eye. I mean, you don't end up being the head coach of the World Junior team in Canada without having, some panache. That's going to happen in that situation. But the way things ended up there, I do not think that you look at his coaching pedigree, at his past, and say, this is a guy who, if he's not getting taken by this team, someone else is scooping him up. There's risk in this. And so to your point, I do think Kevin Cheveldayoff has made the point. He thinks this is a roster that can win a Stanley Cup. Going through the rest of the season with this roster and a rookie head coach who coached his very first, or who was a head coach for the very first time tonight, that you can't tell me otherwise. It is a risk that is filled with question marks on how this is going to respond, especially when there's the issues that I believe, and I touched on them earlier, that Paul Maurice has dealt with in his time here that I think need to be dealt with for this team to go to the next level. That's a big ask. It is a big ask for any coach, for an established head coach. So I think it is a massive ask from a rookie head coach like Dave Lowry.
I'm not saying it's not a big ask, Sean, but what I'm also saying is that part of what we're talking about, changing hockey culture, is not just assuming that a recycled head coach will do a better job than a first-time head coach. You're exactly right. Sometimes first-time head coaches make mistakes at the NHL level, but they can also view things through a different lens, which could end up being a benefit to them. So that would be my counter. I mean, Dave Lowry also played a long time in the National Hockey League, and that counts for something too. Even though he doesn't have the experience of a Darryl Sutter or whatever else. I mean, there's lots of guys who have experience, and there's also guys who don't have a lot of experience that are also able to have success. So to me, you're not just pulling a guy off the street in Dave Lowry. This is a guy who's been around the game a long time. He's served a lot of valuable roles, both during his time as a player, where he was a leader and a letter carrier in some of those stops, and then on coaching staffs. I mean, he's been around guys who are very smart people. So I think it's less of a risk than you do. But I mean, ultimately, hey, Paul Maurice said it when he arrived. Your record is what you are. So ultimately, the record will determine what kind of job Dave Lowry is going to do.
Let's say something quick about the game before we get out of here. I'd said it early on. I mean, you don't, and I should finish this thought off. You replace your head coach, you're looking to get that bounce, right? You're looking to get your players come flying out. Sure. We hear all the old stories are like you're trying to impress the coach, you're trying to fight for ice time, this and that. I think a lot of times what happens when you see a bump like you see from Bruce Boudreau, and I'll go back to oh my God, his name is eluding me. Pittsburgh's head coach, the head coach of the
Mike Sullivan
Olympic team, Mike Sullivan. Mike Sullivan, I had a super interesting conversation with him when they won their first cup that year, that they were outside of the playoffs at Christmas time and then came out and were the best team in the league right through the playoffs and won. And I'd said to him, what did you do to turn this team around? He said, I simply went in and I asked the players, what is it that you want to do? Like, how do you want to play? And that team told him that they felt that they were too burdened by systems and they just wanted to skate. They wanted to play free. So he said, okay, let's do that. So those players went in and they had that situation where they were like, this is what we want. They got what they wanted. And it was like a kid going to the candy store. We get to play the kind of hockey we've wanted to play this whole time when we've been burdened by systems before this. They played free. They played easy. It ends up winning them a Stanley Cup. That, I think, is where you get those bumps. Same thing is happening with Bruce Boudreau. I love this story. He talked about Brock Besser, who couldn't score under Travis Green towards the end there, and now does nothing but score in his short, 6-game sample with Bruce Boudreau. Bruce Boudreau simply said to him, well, every time you came and played us when I was in Minnesota, you scored because you shot the puck all the time. Maybe you should just get back to shooting the puck. What does Brock Besser want to do more than shoot the puck? Well, you get into a mindset where you've got a coach who says, I don't care what you do, just get out there and start shooting the puck. He does that. You're freeing those players up, right? So the bump that you're seeing from those coaches, I don't think those coaches walk in and change the systems entirely in a single day. That's not what happens. You can't do that. It's impossible to do that. But what it does do is it creates the mindset. How do you want to play? Let's play like that. I don't necessarily think that that's what's going to happen here with Dave Lowry. I think Dave Lowry is going to try and skin the cat a different way to get to the same thing that Paul Maurice was doing. But in the end, you heard it from him, Ken. He wants this team to get to a situation where they're going to the dirty ice and they're scoring those hard goals. And I don't liken this to the same situation as what we're seeing right now in Vancouver and what we saw back with Pittsburgh, because those teams were freed up to play the kind of hockey they wanted to play. And I don't know that getting to the gritty areas, never mind, I brought this up in the last show. Sarah Orlesky had a phenomenal interview with Pierre-Luc Dubois in the second intermission of the last game that they played against the Buffalo Sabres, where he talked about, I know that hockey is not always fun to play, but it is, what we need to do to succeed. The fun factor that the Pittsburgh Penguins felt, and I think the Vancouver Canucks are feeling right now, that's not what I think is being sold to the Winnipeg Jets here. We're coming into this situation. They're being asked to do the heavy lifting it requires to be a champion. And so I don't expect there to be that bump. Now, does Dave Lowry get time with this team and time to try and get them down that path in a different way? That's what we're waiting for, but I see the change being a little more gradual, if it is to come, than what we saw from those quick changeovers with guys like Mike Sullivan or Bruce Boudreau.
Yeah, sure. The piano has been lifted. That's how they described the thing in Vancouver. But the Pittsburgh Penguins are still a very responsible defensive team. We saw them in here. They barely gave up any scoring chances. And they go to the hard areas, even their skilled players. So I think that the Jets can find a way to play that style. I don't think the Jets can afford to play a wide open game and not care about defense. I know that's not what you're saying, but I know that you want to encourage them to be more offensive. I think that they can do that while still going to the hard areas. And I think that's what Dave Lowry is going to ask of his team.
I think it's what they need to do. I couldn't agree more that is the kind of goal. Like I'll say it tonight, like the kind of goal that the Washington Capitals scored to win the game-winning goal with a skilled team on the ice that controlled the puck on the perimeter, but eventually goes with a mind of getting the puck to the front of the net. That's how you win. That's how you create great offense. I couldn't be more sold on the idea of the Winnipeg Jets needing to do that. My question at this stage, and Dave Lowry touched on it, is do the Jets have the roster construction to do that? Like if you take a look at the Montreal Canadiens last year and what their fourth line with Joel Armia, Stahl, and Perry were able to do, that line just ground and pushed the puck to the front of the net and jammed it in. And that's where there was success for that team. Can the Winnipeg Jets play that style? That's my question. Are there enough Andrew Kops and Lowry's and players like that, Pierre-Luc Dubois, to consistently have the Jets play that kind of game to get that kind of offense? I couldn't agree more that that's the offense that the Jets need. My biggest question is, do the Jets have the roster construction to pull that off?
Well, after the coaching change, the next change is either the general manager or a trade. So if they don't do that, there will be moves that are made. I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's the next conversation we have to have. Like, I want you to. Well, we're not going to have it right now. We're going to see if they respond first to the head coach, the coaching change. And just one quick thing on the goal. You're right. They went to the net, but the guy who the puck went off his skate is the right-handed defenseman. The goal that is set up by Justin Schultz, what is he even doing down at the goal line? Good on him for going to the... Yes, but he's a defenseman. That's not his job to go to the net. I think he's completely out of position.
If he's got a guy covered there, it is. If he's got a guy covering him on the back end, it is. And I haven't looked at the play. Is there 4 guys down there? If so, maybe it's a bad play.
It was a good result for them. And sure, getting the puck to the net was important, but it just basically bounced. Hellebuck makes the save. It goes off the stick of Justin Schultz, and Connor Sheary's just there to tap it in. So, hey, the Jets are not getting those bounces. You're right. But, but conceptually, I don't know that. Did the Capitals do the right thing in that situation? They got to the net.
Yes.
Okay.
Like, I think it's the old adage. Good things happen when you go to the net. Like, I hate the argument that the Jets got a bad bounce there. That's not the situation. If you throw everybody at the net, your goal is basically to scratch, claw, use your hands, your stick, your skates to keep the puck going towards the net, and you get an ugly goal like that, it's not a bad bounce.
I didn't say it was a bad play. I'm just saying.
You're occupying space. No, sure. But it was suggested in the post-game presser that the Jets got a bad bounce, and that's why that goal is scored. scored. No, that goal is scored because they collapse on the net in an opportunity where there's chaos and the puck bounces off a skate because guys are heading towards the net, making it harder to get the puck out. That to me is the perfect goal that you need to score in a tight game like that. Those are the goals that teams like that are getting, that the Montreal Canadiens got consistently in the playoffs last year, that the Winnipeg Jets aren't getting, and it's the difference between winning and losing games.
Sure. I mean, yeah, the Jets need to do a better job at that, and that's something that will be near the top of their priority list. Another thing they had to do better was be better in special teams, and in Game 1, they took some small strides on that front. I mean, some folks have been asking about David Gustafsson. He crashed into the net in his final shift of the first period, driving to the net, and it looked like he maybe hurt his groin a little bit. It looked like he was very uncomfortable as he left the ice. He had 2 shifts in the third, and that was it. Svechnikov had that strange collision in the neutral zone where his stick kind of broke in half. He had one more shift after that, looked at the trainer and the coach and shook his head and went down the tunnel. So we don't know the severity of those injuries, but I mean, we'll see what tomorrow's practice brings. And hey, this is an interesting time, Sean. We're about to learn a lot about the Winnipeg Jets, about their players, about their about their willingness to commit to being better defensively, to going to the hard areas, and to doing what it takes to become an elite team again. Like we said off the top, it's not often that the general manager comes into the room and says, hey, you know what? You can either be content with mediocrity or do something about it. And most players, when challenged, don't prefer mediocrity to success. But it's all about putting the required work to make the strides that are necessary. And that's what we're about to find out with this team.
Well, and Ken, you make a good point. He goes and he says that, and I think it has to be said by Kevin Cheveldayoff, because Kevin Cheveldayoff went on the record earlier this year to say, this is the team. I mean, this is what they feel. They put all the pieces in place. He feels like that the puzzle is entirely finished and ready to hang up on the wall. And to your point, like the move after this is either starting to like bust up this lineup and try and find different combinations, or maybe bring in different elements that you think can allow you to succeed, or it's finding a different general manager to find that. And it'll be interesting to see how quickly, if the Jets struggle, how quickly the calls that were loud and long for years to fire Paul Maurice, if those calls start turning to a guy like Chevy, or if people just believe that hiring Dave Lowry was not the right move. I don't think the Jets are anywhere near firing Kevin Cheveldayoff. I think that there's a feeling that what he's done with his draft record and what he's put together here is something that can succeed. They just need to find the right thing here. But you're right. Now that the coaching change has been made, there's nowhere else to go other than roster tinkering or reconstruction, or finding a different guy to do that job. Either way, we should get going here, Ken. I got to say, if you would have told me at some point this season that the Gus bus would have arrived and we barely touched on it, I would have called you a bald-faced liar. That clearly there was a lot to talk about here today.
Wow.
I feel like I didn't really get to the chat room nearly enough today.
Gus only had 5 shifts, so we couldn't exactly dig in at the buffet today. So
exactly, blew a tire. The Gus bus blew a tire. But I apologize. I don't feel like I got to the chat room enough today. It seemed like there was so much to talk about and so many different directions to go in. But I sure do appreciate everyone coming in here tonight and spending their time with us. We've been dying to talk about this with you all day, and want to thank you for coming in. Ken, great job as usual. Do we have ice tickets to give away or anything like that?
I think they're still on the road, but they'll be coming back next week. So I think we'll get some on Sunday afternoon.
Well, we'll get on it, and then at that stage, as Ken brings it up, it's going to be an early show on Sunday afternoon as the St. Louis Blues are in town. A really rough stretch coming up here, 5 straight games against Central Division. A lot is going to be decided in these coming weeks, Christmas to New Year's. We are going to your point, we're going to learn a lot about the Winnipeg Jets after this coaching change here. But boy, oh boy, we could learn a lot about their season and what kind of potential it has in the next 2 weeks here. Absolutely crucial. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. It was great to see you. If you haven't subscribed to the Kenny and Renny channel, do so. We got tons of great content for you there, including our last long form with John Maurice and Joe Piscucci. If you missed that guy, you should go check it out. Great conversations with those guys. Hey, what are you waiting for? Click the like button and subscribe for us. It was great to see everybody. We will see you on Sunday.